Hello and welcome to the great telco debate of 2021. And for the second year running, we are staging the event online as travel restrictions and the escalating COVID situation have curtailed our plans for a return to an in-person conference, which would have been today. So we spent the last week moving the whole event over to digital. Our debates are now being broadcast live over 3 consecutive days. That's 2 programmes per day. You can see the full schedule here, and there are more details on the TelecomTV website. We start Thursday's broadcast with debate number 3, the Green Network, and follow this in about 2 hours' time with our debate on the fibre gold rush. And just as we would have done in person at our London event, each 45-minute debate will feature a mix of expert witness statements from our invited guests, an accompanying motion that we want you to vote on, and a Q&A discussion with questions from our audience. The only difference is that we're online, and I'm afraid that once again you'll have to provide your own tea and scones, or coffee and cake. Either would be welcome right now. Well, joining me for today's debate are my colleagues Ray Lemaitre, Editorial Director at TelecomTV, and Chris Lewis, CEO of Lewis Insight and the founder of the Great Telco Debate. Ray, the Green Network is so topical right now, and hopefully we'll get some interesting online questions.
Absolutely. The whole topic of the Green Network as part of broader sustainability efforts has really come to the fore in the telecoms industry in the past 18 months. But these are efforts that have been underway for years, and it's not quite as straightforward as it looks. Today's motion is a fantastic way to look at the challenges this industry faces in being commercial entities and responsible global citizens. I'm expecting some probing questions, and we've already had a few through. But get the rest of them in quick. We're adopting a first come, first served approach.
Yeah, get writing now, and please use the form that we provide on the website. Now, it wouldn't be the Great Telco Debate without Chris Lewis and Graham Wild, and once again, they have written the motions for the debates. Chris, how do you decide who votes for and who gets to vote against?
Well, as you can imagine, Guy, it can be quite contentious. So rather than trying to argue between ourselves who should be talking for and against, we literally toss a coin, or in this case, we actually roll the dice. Since in the absence of using actual physical money in recent times, we didn't have a coin in our pocket at the time.
Oh, no, that feeling. Well, early this week, Chris and Graham got together to record our motion. A structural change in the industry away from competition is the only morally justifiable path to reduce industry emissions.
The green issue is on everybody's lips. We've been talking about it from the point of view of power, of the contributions to the economy, but we wanted a debate which brought out the issues about the whole of the industry and not just the issue around the power consumption and what people might call greenwashing.
So I would urge you to vote for this motion. And let me give you a reason why. Imagine if your government decided that it was going to allow multiple railway networks in your country, or multiple water networks, so you had more than one water pipe coming into your house or business. You'd think that's incredibly wasteful. And yet that's the situation that we're in with telecommunications for historical reasons. There is no reason why we need multiple fibre networks, each consuming power. And there's no reason why we need multiple mobile networks with multiple radios and multiple antennas. We could simplify this, make it much more green and efficient by having a single network and wholesale their services to retail providers. So I urge you to vote for the motion.
I'm speaking against this motion because I think it's important for every element within the telecom industry to understand their demand, the requirement to get more efficient in terms of the way they deliver the services, of course consume less power, but actually at the end of the day, the industry is delivering enormous benefits to society and business as a whole. So therefore we shouldn't walk away from the fact that we are delivering benefits, yes, control our consumption, but the benefits we're delivering to society as a whole are really, really important, and therefore the overall structural change and requirement I don't believe is required.
So vote now, and later in the show we'll see if Chris and Graham manage to sway your votes for or against. But first, we're going to hear our expert witness statements, and these will then lead into our Q&A discussion. So let's now go and meet our special guests. Hello everyone, thank you all so much for joining us for the Great Telco Debate. It's time for our opening comments, and as always, we are imposing a strict time limit of 3 minutes max for each of your expert witness statements. We've got so much to get through in this programme. So let's start, and let me first introduce Arash Ashuria, who is SVP Group Technology Innovation at Deutsche Telekom and is the chairman of the board of the NGMN. Arash, it's very good to see you again. May we have your expert witness statement on the Green Network?
My pleasure, indeed. So, as a leading European telco, for us, Deutsche Telekom is all about enabling participation. And our mantra is, we won't stop until everyone can take part. And we always look at success in terms of commercial success and social responsibility. That's why the motion of sustainability has been always quite core in our strategy. In the last couple of years, we have already had many initiatives, mainly looking on how to address the energy consumption and giving our footprint. We are one of the biggest consumption in the German industry, in some of our leading markets. And we moved from paper bills to online bills. We reduced the SIM size by half. We have designed repackaging and renewable packaging for the CPE and customer routers and set-top boxes. But obviously, these were just initial steps towards a much bigger goal. We have been very bold in going to the public, going to the capital market, and committing ourselves to be net zero on our own footprint by 2025 and net zero for the entire value chain by 2040. Now, it is a big ambition, and the way we think this needs to be addressed is look at a holistic view of the entire value chain. On the technology side, obviously, any modernization life cycle is being used to improve the energy footprint. We have been successfully shutting down 3G in some of our key markets, including Germany. We have been fully migrating, we have been pioneering the radical move to IP transformation and shutdown of the PSTN networks. And above all of that, it's about also working into the supply chain and understanding what are the levers to drive further synergies. We have been working on defining sourcing criteria, which is a game changer by addressing the sustainability and the scoring of our suppliers as a significant element of how we make decisions on sourcing next to strategic fit, operational requirements, and commercials. Last but not least, we try to go more beyond just renewable energy by buying certificates. We want to produce our own energy where it makes sense, and we want to be very transparent, report on a regular basis how we're going to achieve this and where we are on this journey.
Arash, thank you very much for your opening statement and telling us more about your net zero targets and some of the initiatives that Deutsche Telekom is undertaking. Well, next, I would like to introduce Pasha Ponomarev, who is North America lead for sustainability strategy at Accenture. Pasha, welcome to the Great Telco Debate. Can you please give us your expert witness statement?
Sounds good. And thanks for having me. Well, I think that competition is really important in the telco industry. I think everything is not perfect around how competition with a more than a century-old industry has played out. And I think it depends heavily by geography. But I think fundamentally, kind of creating multiple networks and creating redundancy and reliability is really good. In terms of energy consumption and kind of how the transition to low carbon is going, I think, again, it's not perfect, but we're seeing some really, really good news from the industry. One is, and we're projecting that the traffic is going to grow 8-fold from today to 2030. But at the same time, the energy demand will grow about only 15% over the time period for operations of the network end to end. But actually net carbon emissions, meaning emissions after the offsets or purchases of renewable energy, will fall by 40% from today's levels. So demand will grow 8-fold, but the consumption will decrease by 40%. And this is driven largely by commitments from the industry players to science-based targets or net zero initiatives. And those have been adopted by almost 2/3 of the industry. We just heard from Deutsche Telekom, British Telecom. There's a number of leading telco players that are talking very publicly about this and making it part of their purpose statements. So I think that's good, but also important to understand where the emissions are taking place within the value chain. I think almost half of it, the emissions are in the data centers. The fixed networks make up only about 6%, and the balance is in the mobile networks. So there's a lot of work to do, I think, to decarbonize and make data centers more efficient. I think there's a lot of work to do to transition our mobile networks from current kind of 3G and accelerate the shift to 5G just because they're more efficient at moving data through them. And then fundamentally, fiber is actually really reliable, very efficient technology as well. So I think that between fixing some of the competition barriers and helping accelerate the transition, we'll get there. I'm definitely optimistic about it.
Good, thank you, Pasha. Yeah, we do need to retain our optimism here, and thanks for explaining about the net carbon emissions and also bringing up the point of where these emissions are in our networks. Well, let me now introduce our next guest, Martin Halstead, who is Senior Distinguished Technologist with the Communications Technology Group at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Good to see you again, Martin. Can we now have your expert witness statement, please?
Yeah, sure. So like Pasha, I completely agree that, competition, I think, in this industry is absolutely critical. And there are a number of reasons behind that. I mean, if you think of the telecoms industry and its consumption, so current estimates around 2 to 3% of the world's energy consumption has been consumed by telecoms operators. And energy itself is 90% of the operational expense for the operators. So how does competition help with that? Well, I think that if we look at how telecoms networks are evolving through, for example, virtualization and horizontal scaling of network functions across x86-based infrastructure, you build an awful lot of efficiencies there. So you no longer need to build vertically integrated appliances, which are energy hungry, take up a lot of space, cooling, etc. Horizontal scaling of applications, inherently builds efficiencies. Now, if you overlay that in terms of the underlying fiber networks and the access to things like cell towers, radio masts, etc., then the fiber network, the telecoms operators are evolving rapidly in terms of sharing what makes sense for them and then adding value on top of that for the pieces that where they can make the most revenue, right? So the ducting, the access to radio towers, etc. A lot of operators are actually outsourcing that to single providers. So where we say that having no competition, a single operator everywhere, it's not quite as clear cut as that. The operators are, as I was saying earlier, are starting to horizontally scale out their applications for efficiency, and then underneath that, the actual infrastructure itself for a lot of operators is being shared anyway, and that trend is starting to increase. So so the operators themselves over time are becoming more and more efficient. I think that reverting back to days where you have single PSTN-like environments and expecting those to be efficient doesn't necessarily help from the perspective of the operators. In order to make revenue, inherently build competition amongst themselves, and for the industry, competition is good.
Thank you very much, Martin, for your statement there and highlighting the role that competition does play and can continue to play. Well, our next guest joining us live today is Anita Dola, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the NGMN. Anita, welcome to the Great Telco Debate. Can we now have your expert witness statement, please?
Of course, Guy. And representing the NGMN Alliance here, I will, of course, speak about the topics where we need industry collaboration. So as the ICT industry as a whole has to reduce its emission by 45% until 2030. And it's clear that the operators and the industry need to reduce the network's environmental footprint. If you look at the end-to-end service footprint, actually, this is a very complex area, and it's not easy to calculate the end-to-end service footprint because every single party in the value chain has reports about the life cycle assessment of every single component for the sake of calculating the end-to-end service footprint. And this really requires industry collaboration. So we suggest that we need to collaborate across industries. We also need to collaborate between the industry with actors having different expertise, because that's what's needed. And when it comes to environmental footprint, we also need to consider any impact it has on the quality or quantity of resources like land and water, so not only the greenhouse gas emissions. Further, there is already some legislation in place in Europe, for instance, where, for instance, in France, starting in 2022, there is a demand to report on the service, on the carbon footprint of a service usage to end users. And it's not only because of legislative requirements, but also I strongly believe that users will put more and more emphasis on green metrics for their purchase and usage decisions, that this is absolutely necessary. So to conclude, we need an industry collaborative action here to define meaningful methodologies in the end-to-end service footprint calculation. And this would help us to achieve transparency and to identify levers to understand what has the biggest impact in reducing the footprint here. When it comes to network energy efficiency, a lot has already been done in the standards, but the operators and the industry has not deployed and implemented it completely so far. So also here, I think it's important as an industry to analyze the root causes, why the different features are not deployed yet, and also to identify new means, because we need to cope with much more traffic and connected devices going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anita, for your statement there. And yeah, it looks like we're going to need more metrics if we're going to tackle issues such as the end-to-end service footprint, as you mentioned there. Now, I'd like to introduce our final guest for the Green Network debate, Chris Wright, Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer for Red Hat. Chris, very good to see you again. Can we now have your expert witness statement, please?
Absolutely. Thank you. Great to see you. And wanted to start off by saying this is a challenge that's bigger than any one company or any one country. And coming from a background of working in collaborative efforts in open source communities, I recognize the power of global collaboration. So maybe echoing some of the sentiment that you heard from Anita, there is a fundamental need to work together. Now, I am a big proponent of using policy to define very aggressive targets. And we see that across the ESG community. We just had COP26. You heard some very aggressive targets set for investments. And a key part of that is understanding that end-to-end supply chain energy cost associated with producing not just a network, but think of all the network services. And as we talk today about 5G and the return on investment for 5G coming from a set of edge solutions, we really need to take that holistic view. I agree that competition is critical. And so we're looking at, in the technology space, the evolution of hardware to bring down the energy consumption of producing network services. We're also looking at all photonics networks that can reduce the electrical consumption and just powering the physical network itself. So that is driven through some of the industry level competition. I do think we need to reflect on where we can share infrastructure and building, as Martin described, building a common platform provides not just operational efficiencies and industry level efficiencies for targeting common infrastructure, but allows us to have that focal point for how we reduce the carbon emissions and energy consumption in the various portions of the network, core, radio access, and then even out in enterprise edge. I think what we also need to pay attention to is today's network is not what the next generation network will look like. What I mean by that is the consumption of compute shared between an on-premises footprint and an edge footprint will really shift where energy is consumed. And I think we have a great opportunity to collaborate, especially in those edge locations where we're trying to offload energy consumption between devices and edge network locations. That to me feels like a great opportunity to do that industry-wide collaboration. So to me, this is a global challenge. The way we tackle big challenges is with collaborative efforts, with openness, transparency. We need to understand the edge end-to-end energy cost, which is about instrumentation. And I do think we have opportunity to do consolidation and secure sharing of infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Chris. As you say, this is industry-wide, it's global. This is a global challenge, and the role of collaboration there you picked out. And thank you, everyone, for your opening statements. So you've heard from our expert witnesses. Now it's time to challenge them. So send us in your questions. Don't delay. We'll get through as many as we possibly can. Now, Kerry Gilder, CEO of Colt, wasn't able to make it to this live show today, but still wanted to contribute. And I spoke with Kerry earlier and asked her, as COP26 fades away, and despite all the commitments to the international three-scope plans to curb greenhouse gas emissions, whether or not telecoms will ever play a leading role in instigating positive change.
I think there's a couple things that need to happen. One, we need to treat it as any other metric in our business. And the way that Colt looks at this is being committed to science-based targets. And we've just been approved for Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. Scope 3, as you know, puts a major pressure on our entire supply chain. So what we will be doing is holding our partners and our vendors accountable to their sustainability commitments in order to ensure we can deliver the targets that we've committed to in Scope 3. I think the other thing that we have to look at is what are the actions on a daily basis that you're taking and your employees are taking to ensure that sustainability is at the center of your strategy. A couple of the things that we're doing is ensuring that as we put a piece of equipment into the network, we're actually taking something out. So everyone knows that the industry has racks and racks of equipment that are consuming large amounts of power, but actually producing very small amounts of bandwidth because they were created, 10, 15, even 20 years ago. There's pizza boxes that we can put in that have a much lower footprint and a much better energy consumption. We have to be serious about starting to remove some of this high impact equipment and replacing it with the new, and we need programs in order to center that into our strategy. We're greening our vehicles is another element that we're doing, and we already have a large amount of our service fleet that are electric vehicles. We've moved to green energy at almost every one of our states, of our sites, whether that be a co-location or a data center that we're engaging in, and we're making sure that there's a better level of energy. But I think it comes to innovation as well. I think these are all process-oriented things that we can do on a daily basis. But I do think, just like we look at innovation in our technology, we have to look at innovation in how we actually create a green environment. And one of the things we're working on is a pilot right now with a company here in the UK around bioleaching. And what that does is actually take the equipment that we're taking out of those sites and bioleaching it so that we can regain the precious materials and then reuse those once again. So that's just one example of how I think we can bring process, we can bring our people, and we can bring the innovation around the scope of what needs to be done to truly have an impact on the climate and on meeting these scope 1, 2, and 3 targets as we go forward.
And our thanks to Kerry for her contribution to the great telco debate. Now, Chris, we've had a range of views from our expert witnesses. There's plenty there for our viewers to digest. Any initial thoughts or questions from you?
You know, it's so fantastic when people have spent time thinking and synthesizing down into such a short statement and what they feel about this subject. And the cooperation and collaboration across industries came out very clearly. And this, for me, emphasizes the fact that telecoms communications is a part of this broader digital ecosystem. And therefore, if we're going to really understand and be transparent about the flows and the consumptions of power and the footprint and so on, then we need to not just only understand what the fixed and mobile networks do and all the points about the ducting and so on that were touched upon, but also how that extends to the partners in terms of the hyperscalers and the data centers. But I think even more so out into the enterprises and into the individual households and into the cities. You know, we often talk about the way cities are consuming power and they're at the end of the network. So I guess when we talk about the Internet of Things, ultimately, you know, we need to have that broadest possible view. And if I might just pose one question, Guy, to Arash, when you did your opening statement, you talked about the obviously sorting out getting your own house in order, and then the supply chain. In the supply chain, how does that discussion go with the big data center providers, the hyperscalers, and have you thought about the extension into the household and the consumption patterns there, educating everybody involved in this value chain about what connectivity means, what power consumption results as a usage of all that connectivity?
Excellent question. In terms of data centers, yes, indeed. We are, in fact, our biggest data center in Beer has been recently certified as one of the greenest, because we are trying to see best practices in cooling and the maximum usage of a floor space and so forth, so on. So there's been a lot of activities ongoing. And with regards to households, I mean, there is one thing we should never forget, and this is the great thing about telco industries, not necessarily Deutsche Telekom, which is with what we do, we are a key enablers for all the other industries to reduce their CO emission. It's not just the end consumer. And one of the studies we did by our own is, if you look at our emission, and then we looked at digitalization tools, collaboration, connectivity, IoT, as you just mentioned, and how much it can help other industries to increase productivity and reduce their emission and footprints when you move things into cloud PBX. Simple, low-hanging fruit and more high sophisticated solution. We came to the conclusion that there is a ratio of 7.1 to 1, which is from what we consume to enable those services, the benefits on the industry side can be up to 7.1 times higher than our own, which is a great contribution. And to the consumers, indeed, as I said earlier on, we put a lot of efforts in green packaging, the way we package, eco design, as well as now going into wherever feasible, depends on the market, refurbishing custom equipment and create that awareness. We even have a green tariff, mobile tariff, where we say, look, you're going to pay a bit extra, and therefore we're going to do this and that on behalf of you for the environment. And definitely, yes. And there is more to come. And as everyone else said, I think in the collaborative effort, there's a lot of best practice, which I think we should share, because the impact is going to be much bigger when we go in the same direction as the industry and put pressure on the ecosystem to move.
Thank you, Arash, and thanks, Chris, for the question there. It's a great question. Ray, we've given our audience plenty of time to send in their own questions. What have you got for our panel of guests?
Well, We've got a lot of questions in, so I've been busy trying to pull some of them together so we can get through as many of them as possible. So we're going to start with a question that's, I brought two questions about 5G together for the first question for our expert witnesses. And the question is, 5G is well known to be more power hungry than any of the other kinds of networks. Shouldn't the industry just focus on a 5G architecture that uses less power, not more? And will 5G really replace 2G, 3G, and 4G in the end? Or will all those networks really continue to carry on running by one company or another? So two things there really together, but all to do with 5G. Does anybody want to come in and talk about, how we can make 5G networks consume less power and whether 5G will see the end of 2 through to 4G? Any initial takers for that question? Okay, Pasha, we'll come to you first.
Sounds good. Well, I think that there's a few metrics. One is the intensity metric, which is power consumption per megabyte, perhaps, of data transferred. And 5G is undeniably more efficient. However, the absolute demand on energy consumption for 5G networks is higher. The industry and the players that manufacture the equipment that powers the 5G hardware are working hard to improve efficiency of that. But nonetheless, as 5G is very dense networks, we're going to in absolute terms, consume more energy. So then the question is, how are we going to power that energy? Can we find renewable sources as we continue working on efficiency? The second part of the question is, are all the networks going to be operated simultaneously? For a time period, absolutely. But the spectrum needs to be freed up and the legacy networks will eventually be sunset. And that's going to be required. And maybe sometime in the future, new networks operating in those old spectrums with even higher efficiency will come to life. But also, I think that the important aspect of what we do with those networks, I would argue that fundamentally our ability to decarbonize industries with 5G didn't radically change. We can do a lot of those same things with 4G and 3G. Yes, we can do them better. We can do them with lower latency. We can do it with higher bandwidth and higher fidelity. But ultimately, as we look at the promise of ICT technology, we still have a lot of work to do on business models, on incentives, on pre-competitive collaboration, as Chris and Anita have mentioned. And those fundamentals and the promise of ICT to decarbonize remains to be achieved over this decade.
Okay, thank you, Pasha. If nobody else wants to come in on that question, we can move on. Oh, I'm sorry, Anita. Yes, let's come to you.
Yeah, maybe I just add to what Pasha said that we released just recently a very comprehensive overview about network energy efficiency tools and means. And I think it is important to look at what the industry already has in its hand. So it's difficult to speak in actual numbers, but for instance, advanced cooling techniques or a bigger exploitation of the virtualization technologies, promising technical site optimization, higher usage of artificial intelligence for the optimization of switch on, switch off sleep modes and shutdown functions, and so on and so forth. So there is already a bunch of tools and means available, and that's what I tried to emphasize in my witness speech at the beginning, that first of all, not all of those tools and means are implemented, and it's really interesting to understand why. I'm sure there are different factors contributing to the situation. So what can we do as an industry to overcome those hurdles? And then, of course, also to develop more means and tools going forward to reduce energy consumption and to make networks more efficient.
Yeah, absolutely, Anita. And it's great to see some of those techniques coming in, especially using machine learning and other AI tools. And Chris, I saw you wanted to come in on this question as well.
Just one very quick comment, Ray, which is that, the reality of where 5G reaches today and its impact on the market it's sort of, we've been sort of shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit, because we are managed, that is gradually being managed into being delivered. So the promotion of that as the next sexy wave of service obviously is the hype of the industry. The reality is that, as was already mentioned, plenty of stuff is being delivered by 4G and of course by fiber. So I think we need to bear that in mind. And I think the way the telcos deploy those things, and of course the way they work with the suppliers. There is the people supplying the underlying infrastructure, the components, the engines driving this. They are working extremely hard to make themselves more efficient. So I think at all levels we are trying to make it more efficient. I think we have to be careful about the hype around the 5G and God forbid 6G, trying to overpromise the future. Let's concentrate on delivering what we can now rather than what's going to come in the future.
Okay, thank you, Chris. No questions in yet about 6G, but there's still time. So let's come to our next audience question. And this question is, how seriously should we take the impact on global power consumption from more efficient networks and the ability to enable remote working? COVID lockdowns demonstrated that with huge reductions in travel and office working, energy consumption dropped off dramatically. Is this the greatest impact that the telecom industry can have on global sustainability? Pasha, I can see you want to come in on that one.
Yes, I mean, this is the biggest promise of that we must deliver on. Just by the end of this decade, ICT industry can deliver 17% global carbon reductions if we continue working, deploying those technologies. So remote working is a great example. Same as helping reduce energy consumption of built environment, buildings, decarbonizing transportation, even agriculture, distance learning. There's all of these use cases that rely on ICT and ultimately help decarbonize the world. And 17% by the end of the decade and 38% probably by 2050, if not more. I think ICT alone has the potential to help us achieve 1.5 degrees. So I think there's three things that we can do. One is make sure that operations, as we grow and expand the ICT networks, they're carbon neutral. We're going to get there, and hopefully we can stay there as we grow. And then and we keep talking about pre-competitive and collaboration and standards. They are fundamentally really important because it's difficult to grow at speed and with efficiency without standards, data interoperability, collaborating, reusing the infrastructure that can hopefully be put in once. Fiber is really expensive. And three is continuing and investing in those products like distance working, collaboration, agriculture, manufacturing, you name it. There's a whole long tail. I'm really excited about that.
Okay, excellent. We can get your passion from your answer there, and it's a real juggling act, but we can see there's a lot of activity to get to the end goal there. Now, did anybody else want to come in? Martin, did I see you want to come in on this one at all?
Well, just briefly. So, as I was saying earlier, telecoms really has to take, the industry as a whole has to take very seriously, the energy usage that it takes, in terms of, maybe 2 to 3% of, the global energy consumption as a whole. So providing efficiencies in home working such that, the end users themselves that are, consuming those telecommunications services don't necessarily need to, output their own carbon footprint and, an additional, detrimental resources, global resources in terms of travel, etc. There's huge benefits there. So, and in answer to a previous question as well, in terms of 5G, taking, additional power. I take the point, but actually, in the way that it's designed, for example, the services-based architecture was designed from the outset, for the first time to be built in a scale-out manner, so that you get effectively, if it's implemented correctly, the efficiencies that the hyperscalers have in terms of their energy consumptions, and then the use of things like accelerators in compute nodes, such that you're offsetting, baseband processing, for example, from CPUs onto accelerators. We as a vendor like HPE, we actually end up selling less infrastructure in opportunities. But from an industry as a whole, that's a good thing, because we're not stacking boxes, where workloads are running on CPUs.
Okay, yes, a great point. I think that's what the industry is trying to head towards. Okay, let's move on now, because the questions really are flooding, and we've got enough for a 3-hour program here. So I'll move on to the next one. Again, this is a combination of 2 questions. The first part of the question is, there's a lot of talk about what companies are doing to themselves in terms of reducing their carbon footprint and being more sustainable. But is there any independent way that this is being measured? Can companies be called to account? And also, there's another question here that asks, isn't a lot of this power, energy efficiency and power reduction being double counted? How can we be sure that this all adds up? So can anybody come in and talk perhaps about any independent analysis of the claims being made by the industry, or are we not at that stage yet? Arash, let's come to you first.
I think this is an excellent question, and in fact, we are not at that stage. I think there is a lot of need and for finding a common ground on how to make sure that we assess the outcome in a kind of benchmark manner, which is transparent, which is bulletproof, and which is something which can be reported on a regular basis. So clearly, I mean, we have these things for network quality, we have these standards for many things, but not necessary at the moment for sustainability. But these things are being developed, and I think that's a great area of collaboration. Under the umbrella, something like we do, for example, in NGMN, which is bringing methods together and try to figure out, is there a way where we can find a common ground and a common set of criterias, which can be challenged and bulletproof, so that everyone is able to report how green their network is, or in terms of savings and other measures, to be comparable to each other, which is also, again, great competition. Like we used to see this in network quality. It's an area which we are looking at. We are putting ideas together, but I think is a way to go.
Okay, very encouraging, Rash. Thank you very much. And Chris, I could see you wanted to come in on this topic as well.
Just to say that as we've gone from into the ESG world, having been in the CSR world, and into the broader sustainability topic, there are organizations like SASB and Quo Vadis that do benchmarking, because it's not just about the telecom industry. And what we need to have is that broader reporting. Obviously, the financial community is interested, and we see a lot about green bonds emerging. So I agree with Arash that there are things out there. We need a lot more work, a lot more collaboration on it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chris. And yes, Chris, the other Chris, wanted to come in there as well. Chris from Red Hat.
I just wanted to say, if we look at what we're doing today in some of the open source communities, we've initiated a project called OS Climate. And in OS Climate, what we're recognizing is, while we can create a platform that does, say, the data analysis, what we're missing is consistent common data. And in fact, we're creating a data commons project as a part of that. So I think consistent, clear, common data is actually a really fundamental challenge. And that gets back to that kind of end-to-end energy consumption question, because it's not just one point in the network, it's the whole end-to-end picture that's really important. And if you listen to sort of the hype side of what we're promising around 5G and future networks, and then you take that together with what Pasha was describing around opportunities for reducing the global carbon footprint outside of the network by how we consume ICT technologies. The way I look at this is we're building instrumentation to bring together the virtual and physical world. And it's that instrumentation that's critical to help us understand not just what's happening, but where energy is being consumed, how it's being consumed, and how we can apply models to improve energy consumption. And that really requires not just the sensors and the instrumentation and the global network to aggregate all that data, but some common models and some data commons to share information. Because again, this is a global challenge. It's not a single single company, single industry challenge.
Absolutely. And common models and common language is always something that lots of industries strive for. If we can get there with this one, that would be a great achievement. Okay, I'm going to move. I know we're starting to get close on time, so we're going to move on to the next question, which could well be our last. And this one is about the question, the motion, which is about whether the industry should move away from competition, and that being the only morally justifiable way to reduce industry emissions. We've got a few questions in about whether this is applicable from end to end in the industry, or whether this is different for different parts of the network. One of the questions mentions data centers and how it's maybe easier to do it there. Another one mentions that shared infrastructure in the radio access network. Are there particular areas of the telecom network architecture where it's more applicable to have a single network architecture that can help to reduce power consumption, but not impact the competitive services available to end users? Does anybody want to come in on that? Any part of the network where it's more applicable to have a single wholesale network? Okay, yes, Pasha, thank you. And Chris, I can see there. So Pasha, Arash, sorry, let's come to you first.
So, I mean, it's a difficult question to be frank, because everywhere where there was no competition, there was a monopoly. There is lack of innovation, and ultimately the customer will suffer. But in terms of your specific question, where I think you see that across the globe there are many markets where RAN sharing happens today. And there, as you all know, there are two types of RAN sharing: active and passive. Which there is a level of efficiency, but then combined with a huge amount of complexity in terms of how to manage the network from an end-to-end perspective. And I do believe that we have to look, I mean, again, depending on the market, look into these scenarios, but sustainability or energy will be one element if it fits into strategy. There is one additional thing I like to mention very quickly is we have to incentivize our suppliers to spend more R&D and to be more greener. Today on the consumer side, when you go and want to buy a TV, and you look at least in Europe with this classification, most of the time you are willing to pay a bit extra for a TV or whatever device, home device, which is more green and is certified as more green. Traditionally in the telco, we always looked at statement of compliance. So how good it is technically, and what are the commercials. And as I said early on, if we really mean it seriously and bring the right level of weighting and scoring in that, this will drive a lot of innovation and competition, so that the equipment we are using next, with the ability of the architecture revolution of cloud and softwareization, will be a big, to me, is a big leapfrog in terms of changing the game of energy footprint.
Okay, great points there, and a really strong message there for the vendor community as well. And Martin, you wanted to come in on this as well?
Yeah, I wanted to, so I completely take the point on the vendor community, as ourselves being one of those, in terms of how efficient we make our products. But, on the telecoms operators as well have to play ball in this space as well. The typical procurement cycle happens in terms of, as we all know, there's RFI, RFPs. You spend weeks and weeks answering them with all of the technology questions, to highlight how good your product lines are. Those then go into the operator, who then throw them over the fence to the procurement departments within the operators, who then treat every vendor's product lines as being completely identical, and then beat them over the head so that they get the lowest price. So, that part, I think, of the industry is pretty broken. And, the vendor community can definitely work on making their products efficient, but the way then that the operators consume those products, as the previous speaker was saying, bringing technology and compliance alongside procurement, is very key to this.
Okay, excellent. Good point again as well there, Martin. And we've just got time for one more very quick comment to close out here. Chris from Red Hat, let's come to you.
Well, first of all, I could not agree more with Martin. I think it's a really important point. The whole process is critical. I think the role of sharing, I think it's a really important question. And Arash already mentioned there's some areas where it's happening. We see that we can do large scale sharing through common infrastructure securely in places like public clouds and in the early stages of RAN sharing. And I do think we should do some exploration there, but I would be concerned about the outcome of a total consolidation and no competitive infrastructure competitive dynamic, because I think that could be dangerous. Getting back to where does innovation come from and the investments that drive that innovation that would reduce the overall energy consumption. So I think I don't think it's an all or nothing kind of question. I think we have to be really careful about thinking through each portion of the network. And we've already exposed where software centric designs can help reduce costs of not just running, but also reducing the elasticity and scaling up and scaling down as demand is being loaded onto the network and draining off the network at different times a day. So it's a great question. It's the kind of thing that we should take. And the way I started this was about, I think policy can help set really aggressive targets and then let the industry figure out how to get to those targets. And that's the innovation cycle. And that's where those investments come in. And that's where we can talk about fixing procurement.
Fantastic. And actually, Chris, you've just answered one of the questions we didn't have time to get to there with your final statement. So thank you for that. But we have run out of time for the Q&A part of this program today. We could have gone on for much longer. Thanks very much for all the questions that came in, but I need to hand back to Guy at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. And what a great discussion that was. Shame we have to bring it to a close. But this does mean that it's almost time to tally the audience votes. And to remind you, here is the motion that we have asked you to vote on. A structural change in the industry away from competition is the only morally justifiable path to reduce industry emissions. But before we reveal the results, let's first see which way our guests are going to vote, either for or against. So you've all heard the motion, everyone. So let's have a show of hands, please. All those in favour of the motion, please raise your hands now. Let's see, we have got one in favour, one's going twice, no, one in favour. All those against the motion, please raise your hands now. We have two, oh, wow, 4-1 against the motion. Anita, I'm so sorry. It looks like the motion by our guests here has been defeated. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Let's go and see how this compares with our online viewer vote. Our expert witnesses voted there, but what did you decide? Well, the voting is now closed. And here are the final numbers. Well, there you have it. The online viewer vote voted the same way as our guests, but the margins were much, much tighter. 54% voted against the motion, 46% voted for the motion. Chris, you surprised by the outcome of that result, or did you really expect it?
No, I'm pleased that it's as close as it is, because I think it raises many of the questions we've discussed today are at the heart of the industry. I suspect from outside of the telecom industry, that vote will be a lot closer, if not flipped the other way, because it's part of the issue is how our industry reacts with other parts of the ecosystem. So no, I'm not surprised, but brilliant discussion. And I think in fact, the next debate on fiber is going to be exactly part of that. What are we doing? We're building more and more, or are we consolidating?
Indeed. And Ray, your thoughts on the result?
Well, I'm gobsmacked. I can't believe that it wasn't more like our studio vote. I'm very surprised it's so close.
Well, I voted for it. Wait, does it count, does it? Well, that brings to an end our programme on the Green Network, and we'll see you both again for the next debate, which starts in just over 1 hour's time. However, before we go, thank you to all of our sponsors for supporting this year's Great Telco Debate and our online programme series. And of course, a great big thank you to all of our guests, our expert witnesses. You all did a terrific job today. Thank you very much indeed. A reminder that the Great Telco Debate continues. We're back in about 60 minutes for the next debate, which, as Chris has said, is on the fibre gold rush. So please keep sending in your questions. No need to wait for the show to begin. We really appreciate all your contributions. For now, though, from all of the team here at TelecomTV and the Great Telco Debate, thank you for watching and goodbye.